You said bad booty this time.
Oh no. How is that more offensive? Hello everybody and welcome to Backstage Gaming, dramatic takes on your favorite games. I'm Chris.
And I'm Dylan.
And we're back. We have more episodes to... I don't know why I'm saying that like it's a surprise. We do this literally every fucking week.
We have a bag of episodes for you this week.
Santa Dylan has shown up with his big sack full of episodes, and he's going to give us one.
Ready to bestow upon all the good little gamers and gamettes.
Oh my God. What are we? What is our show?
What do you think?
I mean, here we are. Anyway, so for those of you who are first joining us, we talk about games, we talk about storytelling, we talk about theater, because that's what we do every week. Dylan, tell us what we're going to be talking about a little bit this week.
I don't know. What the fuck are we talking? Okay,
God,
sorry.
We talked for 20 minutes about this.
Today we are talking about a fighting game that I'm really excited for, Samurai Showdown. And then we're going to talk about fighting games. Don't run away, please, I promise. We can talk about storytelling and fighting games.
Yeah, specifically, it's more common than you might think. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how... Because, like, fighting games are a very specific thing that also spans, like, there's a ton of different kinds of fighting games out there. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how the way a fighting game plays can be used as an element of its storytelling. And how everything can kind of aesthetically come together. Depending on the kind of game that you want it to be. If I sound tired today in this episode, I'm gonna try to be the consummate professional, pull up my bootstraps and tie my shoes. But yesterday
have bootstraps and shoelaces.
I am a fancy lad. I had to get up early this morning for a job interview because I'm trying to escape retail hell. And
no, I just like the idea of trying to escape.
Yeah.
Leave it foreboding.
And yesterday at my shift at the store I work at, there was not a break in the line of customers from 4 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. I don't know why. It was fucking Monday night. It's
because the store knew you were trying to leave. It's like,
I feel like
Hill.
I feel like my bosses know I'm trying to leave. They keep saying things like, "Oh, Chris, you're so indispensable. We couldn't do without you."
Do you work for Jewish moms?
I mean, no. I work for black moms.
Why is that voice like so universal for like doting and caring?
I don't know, because it is very much only a voice that belongs to like Jewish grandmothers from Manhattan. But yeah, I need freedom from this mortal prison that is working in retail, and I hope that I'll get it. Who knows? Maybe I'll know whether or not I'll probably know whether or not I got it by the time this Mummy's Tomb of an episode releases. So we'll see. So the impetus for this week's episode of Conversation, I keep saying those words in that order, and that's not a thing, but now it is. This week's episode of Conversation was Dylan is very excited for a game called
Samurai Showdown.
And it is
a old fighting game series for the Neo Geo. It's getting a revival this year, but it was moderately big. Maybe not. I was like 6 when SNK stopped making games for a while, so that's probably an exaggeration, but whatever. Basically, it was a series of fighting games. I think they had like reasonable clout, but like they just went away for a while because of the company that made them was going through troubles. And basically, it's having a grand revival. King of Fighters 14 sold reasonably well, so now they are putting out Samurai Showdown, and hopefully we will have more SNK revivals. But anyway, today we're going to talk about Samurai Showdown for starters, and how it kind of creates this very tense... I haven't seen a lot of samurai movies, weeb though I am.
You should change that, my dude. They're fucking great.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it. But basically, if you've ever watched a Western in, like, they have, like, the high noon gun draw.
That is
like,
a thing that Kurosawa, like, stole gleefully from the Western. Like, a lot of his films are very American cinema influenced, and in particular, he was a big fan of the storytelling practices of, like, spaghetti Western films.
Yeah, funny that I'm, like, such a fan of Japanese media, but I've seen more Westerns than samurai films. Anyway, so, it's that idea of, like, the first, like, if you make a move, you gotta commit to that move, or else the other guy will gun you down. And that really is kind of the philosophy of Samurai Showdown. Every swing of the sword you make is like very punishable, and to the point where, like, a standard hit, like if it's a heavy sword slash or whatever, that can do like 80% of your health if you're not careful.
Yeah, this is kind of getting into something we touched on very briefly last week. Like, many fighting games operate in a sort of gameplay model where you learn about how best to cancel unneeded animation. Like,
Yeah.
most fighting games allow you, for a point of, like, say, a jab has, like, 2 frames of startup animation, 3 frames of it is actively dealing damage animation, and then 8 frames of, like, recoiling back to the standard pose.
That's a really quick hit.
Yeah, that would be a very fast hit. I'm making these numbers up. I don't do
I know.
game
I'm
design.
I'm aware.
But if you were in most fighting games, you can, like, all right, you let that 2 frames of startup go. It's got that 3 frames out there. And then once those 3 frames are up, you can hit the kick button and interrupt that default 8 frames of reset and go straight into the startup frames of that kick. Samurai Showdown, not so much.
Samurai Showdown is very much, when you swing a sword, you are committing to that sword swing. If you are kicking with your leg, you'll kick faster, but it won't deal as much damage. And there are all these different things that kind of reinforce this idea of intensity of action. It's not so much like letting as many punches fly. I guess a good game to compare this to, because it's a series that, like, I think most people have heard of, even if not necessarily everyone likes it, is Dragon Ball Fighter Z, whatever.
Dragon Ball's Fighter.
Where, you are flying around all over the place and constantly trading punches and combos and firing energy balls at each other. And
There's an
very
actual
fast.
mechanic where if you and your opponent hit, like, the same button at the same time, you'll do, like, a little cutscene flurry of blows before bouncing away from each other. It's rad.
Yeah, it is. The idea of a game like that is you are constantly on the move, and if you get hit, that other person has to have the technique to keep the combo going and keep you down before you can resume action. And something like Samurai Showdown is very much more like, you're trying to gauge how far away the enemy is from you. You're trying to wait for them to let their defenses down, or if you make the first attack, you want to be sure that it's something they won't predict.
Yeah, it's very much like it is trying to achieve in gameplay the same kind of tension that you get in that moment in the samurai movie where, like, the 2 swordsmen are facing off each other, and, like, you've got that long panning shot of the 2 of them, and then you get the close-up of the one, and his hand is on his katana sheath, and then he, like, unlocks it and, like, pushes the blade forward just a little bit, and you know that there's about to be a swing.
Chris. Why are we using samurai movies when we could be using the greatest samurai movie of all, Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back?
Wait. Hang on. I know you're right.
I am solely talking about the lightsaber duel back when lightsabers were kendo.
Oh yeah, back when lightsabers were, like,
gymnastics.
back when they wanted Jedi to be samurai, essentially.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, in the old Star Wars movies, the lightsaber choreography is based off of kendo, which is a Japanese style of sword fighting.
Yeah, kendo and kenjutsu. Thank you. It's fucking dope.
Thank you, Resident Fight Choreo.
Yeah.
For people who remember that movie, or have seen that movie, period, sorry that Star Wars is not the catch-all of American culture that some believe it to be, but it's convenient shorthand. So, during the lightsaber fight, you kind of have Luke and Darth Vader kind of gauging each other, kind of testing each other's reach. That's more Episode 4 with Ben and Vader, but 5 incorporates the Force a bit more, but essentially what I'm trying to get at is that it's kind of this slow-paced, like, testing each other's guards and, like, waiting for one of them to slip up so you know where, when, and how to attack. That is very much the type of game Samurai Showdown strives to be. In the 90s, there was another duo of games made by Square Enix for the PS1 called not Samurai Showdown, I'm sorry, Bushido Blade. It was a 3D fighter with no health bars. Essentially, you would attack someone, and if you hit their limb, that limb is now unusable, or that limb gets a debuff. And it was made in a way so that, like, you know, if your weapon hits, like, their head or their abdomen, that is an instant victory. So, like, it's just that kind of philosophy of very intense, very deliberate style of gameplay.
Yeah, and I love it because, again, it taps into just what people expect from a samurai fight, like, both in popular culture, because, like, you know, that whole idea of, like, the two samurai facing off and, like, the long still shot of, like, the cherry blossom leaves fluttering in the wind, like,
yeah,
that's what a samurai film means to the minds of just, like, popular culture, because that's what the film's always depicted.
Yeah.
But it's also cool because that's the case because of that is the result of people looking at traditional ways that samurai would fight. Like, there is a style of, or like a technique in the use of the katana where the way you draw your blade is a cut.
Yeah.
Which means, as a filmmaker working with actors using the katana, you've got a built-in, like, 1, this is historically accurate, 2, it's a fucking quick draw scene. And you've just been given that gift, and it's a fantastic way of, like, the tension and the genre and the historical accuracy all, like, blending together, and that's something that Samurai Showdown, making the choice to go for this much more deliberate, much more, like, your moves are openings for your opponent, so you have to think carefully, that all becomes an element of the storytelling that the game is able to pull off, which is really cool.
Last thing I'll say about Samurai Showdown before I move on is that another thing that, like, really sells that that series is its music and atmosphere. You know, a lot of fighting games, I think, are known for their very bombastic soundtracks. In, like, recent games, like, in recent fighting games, I hear a lot of butt rock, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, I love me some good butt rock. Good butt rock is an oxymoron, but we're gonna roll right ahead. I love me some butt rock. But, like, you know, Samurai Showdown is much more ambient. You'll hear, like, howling wind, or, like, maybe the rustle of leaves, and the occasional note from a Japanese instrument.
Yeah, there's some, like, taiko drums built in there that I've heard.
Yeah.
Like, it's they do a lot to really zero in on this aesthetic they're going for of the samurai fight. The samurai showdown, one might say.
Oh. No, okay.
And credits roll.
Moving on, we're going to, I guess I want to talk about Street Fighter briefly, because that series went in 2 directions from Street Fighter 2. So, Street Fighter 2, for all intents and purposes, is like the original fighting game. There are other games where, you know, it is one-on-one combat, but I think Street Fighter 2 is really the first one to, like, take that formula and turn it into a success.
Having played Street Fighter 1, it sure as hell wasn't Street Fighter 1.
Oh, hell no. So, Street Fighter 2 is kind of where it was good. And not only good, it was great. And that is, you know, most 8 out of 10 fighting games will have based at least the basics of their style on Street Fighter 2 in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And
we should say 2D fighting games.
Yeah. I guess that's what I meant. Well,
Yeah.
even, like, some 3D fighting games to an extent. Definitely not Tekken or Dead or Alive, but, like, you know, I've played, like, some 3D King of Fighters games. Street Fighter 2, you know, you have special moves, you have your standard attacks, like punches and kicks of varying strengths, and the harder an attack hits, the slower it is, but the further it reaches, you know, stuff like that. If you jump, you're vulnerable while in the air, you can't guard. So that's another thing. So it's very much like, you know, it's not exactly as tense or as it's not trying to build that atmosphere of tension like Samurai Showdown does. Street Fighter 2 is very much like it is the median. You can go all out, you can hold back, but there's a greater emphasis on pace, on a faster pace rather. Street Fighter 2 kind of spawned two series. I mean, like, obviously it spawned the rest of the Street Fighter series, but it also kind of serves as like the groundwork for the Marvel vs. Capcom series. So from Street Fighter 2, we go to the Street Fighter Alpha series, which is a midquel between Street Fighter 1 and 2, and it stars the characters as they are younger, and it has more of a colorful comic book presentation to it. So unlike Street Fighter 2, where, you know, you have like maybe one or two basic combos per character, and there's no air guarding, Street Fighter Alpha, you can air guard. There are a lot more attacks in the air. There's a greater emphasis on like projectiles and reflecting projectiles. There are mechanics built into the game for like really quick and fast combos, dashing, all of these things that make the game feel more faster and a little bit more comic
super heroic.
Yeah, super heroic, some might say. Which leads us into the Marvel vs. Capcom series, which kind of keeps the aesthetic of the Street Fighter Alpha games, but throws in, you know, the X-Men and dozens of other characters from other Marvel series, depending on which game you're talking about. And so this is kind of where like Street Fighter gets like really crazy, where like, you know, you have Wolverine and he's like running across the screen, like slashing wildly. You have Cyclops who like will use a laser, but like the laser is like attacking the entire screen. It's kind of gone from like, these are dudes fighting and maybe occasionally throwing a fireball or two to, you know, these are the X-Men.
Yeah.
They're throwing like huge Goku-sized Kamehameha waves, and, you know, oh, there's fucking Magneto. He's fighting a karate guy.
Karate guy is dead.
Karate guy is dead. So there's this transformation. They took the formula that Street Fighter 2 started with, and they molded it into something that is a lot bigger in presentation. There's a bigger emphasis on keeping combos going while in the air. There's this idea of like, while you're fighting, you can tag in a teammate to come in and do an attack real quick. And so,
which is now just like everywhere in fighting games.
That is very standard in many fighting games. And so it creates this thing where it's no longer like, you know, just martial arts or like, you know, samurai warriors fighting. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, fighting games can do a variety of things based on like how they are presented. And what Marvel vs. Capcom is, you know, its own wild. I'd compare it to like, you know, the Avengers movies nowadays, where like, Chris, you've seen them more than I have. Just think of like something where like something really cool that happens in one of those movies.
Oh,
like a tag team or something.
Yeah, I mean, like at this point, I feel like Civil War has been out for long enough that like statute of limitations on spoil. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything about the movie, but like statute of limitations for not talking about it is kind of done. But the best thing about Captain America: Civil War, in my opinion, is the big fight that happens at the airport. It's like the big set piece, and it is like, to me, especially to me as someone who does fight choreography a little bit, it's the coolest because they let each of the characters do their own thing to such a cool degree, where like Captain America and Spider-Man will be having a punch out, and then like, oh, they like in the middle of that have to dive out of the way of like Ant-Man, who's grown to giant size and is stomping through while he's being like Hoth speeder tied up by War Machine. And like, honestly, this actually ties into what I was about to jump in and say. Like, the fact that you, in the Marvel vs. Capcom games, they introduced this idea of like, you know, you're Wolverine and you're fighting Ken, and you're like attacking, doing all your cuts, and then mid-combo, fucking like Rouge can jump out and like blast him with an attack and then disappear.
Don't you mean Rogue?
Rouge the Bat fly out and blast him with an attack and then fly away. Like, that's such a comic book crossover moment that they have created in the gameplay that I absolutely love. And that's like, as best as anything, kind of is a perfect microcosm of what exactly we're talking about here.
Thank you. I was really floundering there for a second, but you basically took everything I was trying to say and made it work.
Woo! Did it. But yeah, like that kind of thing, and that's one of the things that makes fighting games so cool is like using the same basic conceit and then dressing it up with different mechanics and different like stylistic choices. You're able to deliver on so many different like kinds of fights because fights are storytelling, and I could do a whole fucking rant about that. But instead of that, let's sit down in our seats here in the back of the theater and crack open our playbill. Talk a little bit about what you guys should be looking out for me and Dylan is. I should really find some kind of transition music to get us in and out of this section, but we'll see if Chris does that in the editing room. Dylan, tell me... I feel like I remember something, but I don't really remember it. Do you remember Macross?
Dude, I remember Macross. And you know what? Audience members, even if you don't remember Macross, you can remember Macross with us. Me and our mutual friend Coop have started a podcast called Dude, You Remember Macross, where we talk about the 1983, 82, or 83 classic Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. In this, we kind of reminisce about the show. We talk about character motivations. Kind of, you know, I do my acting thing while analyzing. I don't do my acting thing. I do my character analysis thing.
Come along. Come along while Dylan analyzes this 1980s anime in the character of King Lear. I'd subscribe the fuck out of that podcast.
So we talk about this show, and you know, it's a really chill time. If you have any enthusiasm for mecha anime or 80s anime or any combination of the two.
I do!
Hell, if you like idols. Macross talks about idol culture. Maybe not in the way it should, but it can talk about that. You should message us and talk to us about talking about the idol culture as presented by Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. And you should do that by checking out our Dude You Remember Macross podcast that we currently have on, I think we have it on Apple FM now.
I know it's on Spotify.
It is definitely on Anchor. It's on Anchor FM and Spotify. And I believe it's on Apple FM as well, but I will have to double check that.
You should also go show some love to our friends over at the Unexplored Places podcast. They are an actual play podcast. Dylan was on the previous arc as a temporary character when they did sort of a fun time travel-y arc, if I'm remembering correctly.
Not
time travel-y, but like
flashback.
time skippy. And
time
Dylan and
skip, yeah.
Yeah. And Dylan and I are both going to be doing some stuff with them moving forward for some of their Patreon exclusive content, some of their in-between seasons content that they've got coming up. I don't know if you're involved with this one, Dylan, but I'm actually recording with them tomorrow night for a one-off in which we're going to be playing. It was voted on by people on Twitter. We're playing a one-page RPG called Bad Boys that is about a near-future heist of the unreleased Carly Rae Jepsen singles. And I'm so excited.
Oh no, I think I'm missing out on that one, unfortunately, but that sounds amazing.
It's going to be incredible. I'm so excited. But yeah, check them out on Twitter or on wherever you get your podcasts. Unexplored Places, they're super fun. We're getting very near to the end of this first season of a podcast that I was involved in recording called
Unwell.
Unwell, thank you, a Midwestern Gothic mystery. I am in the final episode in the coda of the season. It was a super fun little scene to record, and the rest of the podcast has been rad. They just passed like 10,000 downloads, which is nutty, and I dream of. But yeah, go show them some love at Unwell Podcast on Twitter. They're really fun and really spooky, and the audio editing is just like phenomenal and blows the crap I do on this show out of the water.
We are also, Chris and I are both featured in King Me, a podcast by our friend Tom. Together we talk about a, how do you describe Creep Show 2, Chris?
Bad.
It's pretty bad. It's a very bad movie anthology of one Stephen King short story and two
not Stephen King short stories.
It's a very surreal film. One I recommend, but like, hey, it's on YouTube for free and you can watch it and then listen to us rip it apart.
Yeah, so Be on the lookout for that. That episode of King Me should be dropping at the end of April or beginning of May. And if you want to hear us get like real mad at like a kind of racist old horror movie, I promise it's actually really fun. And we have now launched a Patreon for Backstage Gaming to help us just like, keep this thing going so we're not losing money on web hosting fees or anything anymore, and to hopefully fund improving the podcast and starting other podcast projects. This week, we get to say thank you to one of our starting up patrons who pledged at the $10 amount, which was awesome. Our friend Coop, the same Coop that Dylan is in this podcast in. So thank you, Coop. Here is your one-time shout-out. Thank you so much for the support. And if you want to get in on the love, you can help us out. We launched, as of recording, yesterday, and are already halfway to our first goal, at which point we will no longer be losing money on this thing. So if you like what we're doing, please consider helping us out with that. It would mean the world to us. Thank you. There was our plug zone. Let me tell you about my plug zone.
God, what is... I thought the morning podcasts were...
Turns out 3 p.m. is peak horny time for us two.
How right you are.
So, now that we've gotten all of that housekeeping out of the way, Dylan, you said that there were a couple other fighting game series you wanted to touch on as far as this topic goes. Dylan has played many more fighting games than I have, so he's sort of got the reins on this one, folks.
Yeah, and because I'm the one who is talking, I have no self-control, so I will keep rambling until Chris tells me to stop.
Woo!
Anyway, yeah, I guess, like, there's really, like, one big one, but... Oh, actually, now that I think about it, so let's talk about BlazBlue, Chris.
Oh, I was hoping you would.
So... BlazBlue is a fighting game.
BlazBlue is an acid trip.
It is referred to as an anime fighter, and what that means is it kind of takes, like, the crazy, like, hyper-fighting comic book action that you would get from a game like Marvel vs. Capcom, and, it takes away the tag teams, but, like, it kind of keeps the, it keeps the emphasis on, like, long strings of combos and aerial combos and, like, knocking people up into the air and keeping them there. And I think the weird thing about BlazBlue and the cool thing about BlazBlue is that, like, have we ever talked about visual novels on the store or on the show before, Chris?
We have not as of yet.
Okay, so I'll make this quick. Visual novels are a very popular form of video game in Japan, where basically they are these text-based stories that will have, they'll have, like, little graphical references for, like, characters on screen and, like, the environment you're in. But, like, really a lot of the story is conveyed to you through text. And they can vary in a lot of different ways. But to make things short, BlazBlue is a fighting game, but it also has a story mode, an incredibly complex, detailed, nonsensical story mode that is a visual novel with fights interspersed throughout. The visual novel aspect of it is important because I want to really just kind of... I want to make it clear, like, how much thought... It's weird to say much thought because also it, like, a lot of times it feels like they're making shit up as they go along. But, I guess, like, there is this... They are taking this fighting game and they are presenting it as, like, a huge world with multiple complexities and stuff like that. So every character has their own distinct fighting style that uses their own specific, like, magical item that they base their fighting style around. If
to the degree, I want to just throw this out there. BlazBlue is wild because there's, like, no overlap between characters in terms of how you control them.
Right.
Like most fighting games, just, and I'll tie back into where you're going with this, Dylan, I promise. But
I see where you're going.
This brief loop out. Most fighting games.
I was actually going to go there anyway.
Yeah,
so
there's a general idea of, like, this button is kicks, this button is punches, or maybe, like, this is, light, medium, heavy kicks and light, medium, heavy punches, and, like, the general way of doing combos and doing special moves will be, like, fairly consistent. There will be specific sequences for different characters, but there is a, like, this is how Street Fighter 2 plays, or this is how Soul Calibur plays, or this is how whatever.
Yeah.
Every character has their own, for lack of a better term, control gimmick in BlazBlue. And every character, like, there will be characters that have the very typical, like, you know, quarter circle forward on the joystick and a punch will do a combo. And then there are other characters where it's like, no, hit these 3 buttons at the same time and shake the controller to do your combo. And, like, obviously I'm exaggerating slightly, but, like, only slightly.
Yeah, so, you know, in most fighting games, if you look at the heads-up display, you will have a standard, like, you know, you got your health bar, you have maybe a stagger meter, and then you have, like, your super meter. And those are consistent for every character in the game. They all just, like, you know, one might use the bar slightly differently, but, like, that bar is still for that character. In BlazBlue, however, one character
all
might
bets
have...
are fucking off.
Yeah, all bets are off. Like, every character has, like, you know, the character I main in BlazBlue, Hazama, he has a grappling hook, and that has its own meter in the UI, or in the heads-up display. You know, another character, a Hakumen, he does, like, counters and parries, and so when he blocks, that builds up his own meter. On top of that, when you are playing BlazBlue, you have your standard, like, three different attack buttons with like, varying strengths. But, like, then you also have your drive button. And what is your drive button, I hear you ask? Well, in the story of BlazBlue, which is why I mentioned the fact that it's a visual novel at all, every character has, like, their own magical artifact called a Nox Notoris, which is where they get their fighting style from. And so the drive button uses their Nox Notoris, and they use their Nox Notoris to, you know, whatever that is. So for Hazama, that's, like, his grappling hook, like I was saying. For Bang Shishigami, a ninja, that is
a giant
bunch of
fuck-off
shurikens.
nail.
A giant fuck-off nail that he just has on his back.
What I love about this is, this goes back to, again, we're talking about, like, how all of this stuff comes together. Dylan earlier referred to BlazBlue as an anime fighter.
Yes.
It really is, like, if you've ever watched a shonen anime like Hunter x Hunter or Naruto or what's the My Hero Academia, I hear is very much like this, though I haven't ever watched any of that show.
From what I understand.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. All of these shows, the conceit is, you know, you get this ensemble of characters, each with their own very unique thing or power set or thing that they're good at. And that is what BlazBlue does, and it does it so well. And, like it or hate it, I know the BlazBlue series is, like, kind of controversial among fighting game people.
I don't think it's controversial so much as, like, people just like to pick on it.
Yeah, because it's doing all this weird stuff. Like, it's a wild black sheep of a game, but it's doing all that because it's trying to go for the same feeling as you get watching, you know, Hunter x Hunter and seeing the one guy with 80 hands go up against the guy who fights by summoning cloud demons out of his giant pipe. Like,
there's like, Hunter x Hunter, or not Hunter x Hunter, sorry, BlazBlue has a character who, when you press the drive button, like, it activates her semi-conscious bow staff.
It's so good. It's like...
It's crazy.
Again, say what you will about the gameplay, and, like, I adore BlazBlue. I am also terrible at it. Like, it is not a fighting game that has ever clicked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's because there's just so, like, there are so many different characters, and they are so specific that there's no...
It's not a party fighter where you can just pick it up and try something new.
Yeah. You won't find a variation of a character you like. It's either you learn how to get good with that character, and you eventually make it make sense, or you're just kind of wallowing in, this is okay, I guess, land.
But I adore it from just, like, the degree to which they commit to that over-the-top anime goofiness and melodrama.
Yeah.
And how much that is reflected in, again, their choice to make all of these characters absolutely batshit insane.
Oh, and so before we move on from that, the last thing I wanted to talk about was, like, you know, Samurai Showdown, I talked about how the music is very sparse and tense. Yeah, you know where I'm going. You know, Street Fighter, you have, like, you know, these kind of peppy, upbeat, like, heroic tunes. Later games would kind of mix it up a little bit, but, like, for the most part, Street Fighter is known for its very heroic tunes.
BlazBlue is nonsense.
BlazBlue is amazing.
Its OST is so good.
So, the OST for BlazBlue is done by a Daisuke Ishiwatari, who is the composer, character designer, and lead game designer of the Guilty Gear series. Which, for people who are wondering what Guilty Gear is, think Blaze Blue, except less crazy and more 90s in terms of aesthetic. And where do I even start with Blaze Blue's soundtrack?
Like
it's really good for starters.
It can bounce from like orchestra to electropop to butt rock and back in the course of one song.
Like, there's a character who is, she's a vampire, and it, like, her character theme has, like, this very Baroque sound to it, but, like, then it'll turn into hard rock at, like, the drop of a hat. There are not only themes for characters, there are themes for one character, Bang Shishigami. We were talking about him earlier. He's, like, he has a super mode where, the whatever song is playing completely changes, and you get, like, this awesome hard rock song sung by the guy who did the opening to Dragon Ball Z. There's just, like, you don't know what you're going to get with these characters. There's specific themes for two characters who are fighting. There are two characters named Jin and Tsubaki. When they fight, they are star-crossed lovers, and there's this Japanese woman singing these English lyrics about, like, how tragic this fight is.
It's amazing. And again, completely leans into the genre of anime that it's trying to emulate.
It's trying to make every fight feel like the full gravitas, like this is, if the character isn't like a super serious character, maybe it'll be like a silly little like, haha, we're play fighting type of thing. But like, for the most part, like every fight feels like the end of an arc in an anime TV series.
It's so good. I absolutely adore what they hit in that game.
And so, as you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic about Blaze Blue. It was my first fighting game. Basically, what we've been trying to get at with this topic today is just kind of like, A, fighting games are cool. B, if you don't like one fighting game, you can get a variety of different experiences. No two fighting games are alike. Even if they are similar mechanically, one might appeal to you more in terms of like aesthetic or how it kind of sells the action that it is trying to convey.
And this is what we've been talking about here, this sort of like synthesis of all of these things down into like a very concise, like, for lack of a better term, thesis statement on what the game is trying to be. Every game does this, or at least most do. Fighting games are just a very handy one to look at because, like, there's only so many things that it can do differently. Like, the formula of how a fighting game works at this point is more or less established. So by looking at how individual games engage with that formula, like all of the ones we talked about today, it provides a really cool look into, like, exactly what the goal of those choices were without having to break down a lot of, like, disparate systems that might come into play in a more complex type of game.
Yeah.
Just as an example of another game that does this very well, so since we talked about it a lot last week, I've actually got and played some of Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and holy cow, this game nails the samurai aesthetic. Like, the cutscenes are on point, the music is, like, almost entirely, from what I can hear, traditional Japanese instruments. Like, all of the enemies, including the more, like, nightmarish enemies that start to pop up, look like they came straight out of, like, an oil painting on the wall of a pagoda from Sengoku era Japan. Like,
I cannot wait to play this game.
Like, hats off to From Software. I'm not that far in, and we're not talking about difficulty right here. I'm just saying, like, aesthetically, they absolutely nailed it. And, like, getting good feels like you're becoming a badass samurai, and I absolutely, like, all this is to say, this kind of stuff we're talking about in fighting games shows up in a lot of games out there, and if you, like, start thinking about why the systems are put together the way they are, you
will get an idea for, like, the type of story or experience is intended for you.
You'll find some interesting overlap at the very least. I think that'll probably do it for us for this week, Dylan.
I think that's a good note to end on, yeah.
That was a fun little, like, us ranting about cool things, but I liked it.
Yeah, I cannot, or rather, I am sorry for all the editing you're going to have to do.
That is okay.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you all for joining us on this week's episode of Backstage Gaming. We hope you had fun. We certainly did. If you had fun, you should check out our website, bsgpod.com. There you'll find all of our episodes. You'll find a bio link. You'll find some like a glossary of terms that we've come up with of sort of like our acting stuff over the months of doing this. And you'll also be able to send us, did I say a contact form? There's a contact form. You can send us your thoughts. You can also find our show on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher, and in the Google Play Store. If you like what we're doing, please consider dropping a rating and review in iTunes. That'll really help us to just sort of build up and get more people listening. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed. Tell your friends about us using social media.
Social media? So you want to learn more about backstage gaming, huh? Alright, yeah. Social media. You can check us out on Facebook. You can check us out on Twitter. Our handle is @BSG_cast. We have a YouTube, and if you like what we're talking about, or you hate what we're talking about, be sure to talk about us with the hashtag BSGPod. Huge thanks once again to our friend Brendan French for our key art. If you like what he's done for us, you should check out his Squarespace at brendanfrench.squarespace.com. That is BRENNEN-French.squarespace.com. You can also check him out on Instagram at instagram.com/BrennanFrenchArts.
Also, huge thank you to our friend BioQuery. He is the musician behind our theme song, Dot Sound Radio Volume 1, Instrumentality. He's super cool. He's got a ton of fun electronica. He's always on that grind doing production for other music outfits in LA. You can find him at his SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/BioQuery. That's BIOQUERY. Or on Spotify by searching BioQuery. And you should really go give him a listen because he's always doing cool stuff. And one more time, just for good measure, please consider going and checking out patreon.com/BSGpod. Anything you can do to help us out would be really appreciated. We are really enjoying this and wanting to put more and more of our time and effort into this podcast and other podcasting projects that we have in the works. And anything that you can do to support that would be hugely appreciated and help to free us from the eternal struggle for capitalist success. So please check it out. See about the reward tiers. See about just, help us out if you can. And we would love you forever for that. But we love you forever anyway.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that because the soulless capitalist machine is currently crushing my body.
No, Dylan. Deactivate all the capitalism on the detention level. Shut off all the capitalism on the detention level. Goodbye.